And I'd like to welcome everybody to the final Intuity Tech Talk of 2018. The session today will cover NetFlow versus NBAR, exploring the upside of both approaches. I'm John Diamond, and I'm a Senior Systems and Solutions Engineer at Intuity. And with me today is my colleague Pete Bartz, who's a Senior Systems Engineer. We'll be your hosts for the next 30 or 40 minutes. Tech Talks, as most of you know, are designed for our customers and technical members of our authorized partner community. These sessions are recorded and are available on demand from the Intuity YouTube Center. They're a good resource for learning more about the product or reviewing features you may be interested in implementing. A few housekeeping items before we get into today's content. The call is on mute mode to eliminate any outside noise. However, feel free to ask any questions at any time via the chat panel. We'll have time at the end to take questions that have been posted. So, with that, let's get started. Today, we'll be using Intuity Network Analytics, usually called ENA, but in the BMC community, that's also known as Intuity 17.0. ENA is the upgrade to Intuity 16.5. By the way, if you have any questions on this release, please don't hesitate to contact your Intuity systems engineer. We're more than happy to discuss any facet of the new product with you. If you've ever wondered what the difference was between NetFlow and NBAR, what is the optimum way to use each, and what benefits you receive by using them, today is your opportunity to find out. So with that, let's get started. We're going to be covering the primary differences between the use of flow monitoring and NBAR, when they are ideally used, one versus the other, and the benefits you'll receive from using them. Let's kick off with a very high-level overview of the difference between NBAR and NetFlow. First of all, they have a similarity in that on a per interface basis, you can obtain not only a list of the applications being used by the traffic that is flowing through that interface, but also the volume of traffic, the amount of traffic on a sample-by-sample basis over time. So from that standpoint, that's why we're comparing the two technologies together. However, if you have a requirement to understand where the traffic is coming from and going to, who are the endpoints at the end of each of the conversations, then you'll need to be using Flow. Flow provides that information, NBAR does not. So NBAR is identifying the different applications in use and how much traffic is flowing for each, but not who's talking to who. However, if you've got multiple different applications using the same TCP or UDP port, then that's where NBAR scores over the flow monitoring. With NBAR, if you've got multiple different applications using, for example, HTTPS, which is not uncommon, then with suitable configuration and sometimes default settings on the routers supporting NBAR, then you will be able to differentiate those and count the traffic on one application separately from another. You can't do that with the flow reporting. All of the HTTPS would be lumped together in terms of being treated as the same application. When it comes to the monitoring load, any form of flow monitoring typically should be thought of as a fairly heavyweight technology. The routers are configured to send flow records back to the Intuity monitoring systems, and depending upon the number of unique conversations that are happening on the network, flowing over the ports on the routers that are providing that information, then that can be a large amount of information having to come back from the routers in the form of flow records to provide the instrumentation. The impact on the Intuity servers on occasions, under extreme circumstances, can mean that you need to increase the number of servers being used. Conversely, with NBAR, the monitoring load can be very low or just in the medium range. The reason being is that it is SNMP polled versus the flow records being sent from the routers. With NBAR, the amount of data being placed on the network and the load is based upon the number of applications, different applications that you're polling statistics for. And that is under your control. It's not based upon the number of unique conversations on the network. With NBAR, there are two flavors of NBAR, the original NBAR and the newer NBAR 2. They are very similar in overall concept. They basically do the same thing, but and given that they are both Cisco exclusive technologies, you'll only find them on Cisco devices. If you've got these in use, they will have to have been configured using a CLI setting on the device. Typically, it's just a single line, and Pete will show you that in a moment. When you're using NBAR monitoring in Enturity, you need to enable the monitoring of each and every application that you are interested in. The more applications that you monitor, the higher the load that is placed on the server and the devices. Under normal circumstances, that's going to be minimal, minuscule load. But if you have a very large number of ports that are NBAR instrumented, and you start monitoring a large number of different applications per port, then that will start to be to grow. The monitoring that we perform, Pete will show you when we get onto NBAR, that we provide an indication of the percentage coverage per port. What that means is that you nominate which applications you want to be gathering statistics on. That may not represent all of the traffic. There may be additional applications that you have decided not to monitor. Under those circumstances, you will not have 100% coverage. In other words, the total of all of the traffic associated with all of the monitored applications will be lower than the overall total traffic flowing on the port. And so we give you an indication as to what proportion, what percentage of the traffic you're actually categorizing. That missing traffic that you're not categorizing, Pete will also give you an indication of a command line operation that you can use to get an idea as to all of the traffic, and so that you can spot the applications that have a significant amount of traffic that you are not currently monitoring. Finally, NBAR is supported on Cisco's IWAN technology. The difference between NBAR and NBAR 2 is that the original NBAR supports around 80 to 90 different application types. NBAR 2, out of the box, identifies more than 1,000 different application types and can be expanded with what Cisco refer to as application packs. NBAR returns entries for every one of those 80 to 90 different applications, whether or not there is any relevant traffic being monitored or being observed. For example, one of the traffic types that it identifies is eDonkey. If there is no eDonkey, then it will still return a value, which will be 0. NBAR 2 is subtly different. NBAR 2 only returns statistics on applications actually being observed. So it's not going to be returning over 1,000 different counters indicating that most of them are 0. It's only going to populate the ones that are actually being seen. Subtle difference, but you can use that to your advantage. One more thing about the way that Enturity does NBAR monitoring, and this can be another reason to use it either instead of Flow or in addition to Flow. There's nothing stopping you using both. And that is that we do application blacklisting. You can nominate one or more application types to be blacklisted on a port-by-port basis. That means that if any traffic, even a single packet associated with a blacklisted application is observed on that port, you're going to get an event raised in real time to warn you of that fact. Now, that can be useful if you've got specific types of traffic that you really do not want on a particular part of the network for various reasons, primarily security and related type of reasons. You can have a proactive warning that you're seeing that traffic. One particular point I will raise, I mentioned that you've got over 1,000 different application types on NBAR 2. Because it's not populating the list of statistics for those that it isn't observing, then at the port level, we're only going to be showing you statistics relating to the applications that are being observed. Now, if you wanted to blacklist an application that isn't currently being observed, at the port level, you're not going to be able to do that because it isn't in the list. You can't select it to turn on the blacklisting. But, subtle difference here, if you look at the device level, although we're not polling for statistics at the device level rather than the port level, we do provide you a complete exhaustive list of all of the applications at the device level, which means that you can nominate one or more of them for blacklisting, and that will then be the default setting for all of the ports on that device. Then if you want to, that can be overridden at the port level. One final note about Flow. Entuity provide two different levels of flow monitoring. The basic level, which is also known as IFA, is included in the product. Everybody has that option if you've turned it on. We're all licensed for that. You can also obtain a premium flow monitoring. There's an additional module license associated with that. The main differences are that the basic flow has preset time periods for gathering and representing and holding the data. The finest grain detail is 5 minutes, and then it stores that for a certain length of time, and then it has an hourly granularity storage for further length of time, and then a daily. With the premium version, you can adjust the amount of time that each of those levels of granularity are stored, and if you want to, and most people would, you can add a 1 minute granularity to the front of it as well to give you finer grain detail over the statistics. Because you can change the amount of time stored, you can increase it as well beyond the default 35 days that is used in the basic reporting. We don't provide you any information about individual conversations in the basic IFA. If you go for the premium version, however, we will give you conversation information, and that is very useful for identifying the conversations that are dominating a particular port. We've got finer control over things like grouping of aspects together for reporting and doing more interesting areas of reporting, identifying DDoS attacks and things like that. Pete's going to show you a bit of that, but that's only in the premium version. And finally, the way that you roll this out, you can, if you've got the premium version, delegate the handling of flows to additional Entuity servers to offload it from the main Entuity servers. You don't have that flexibility with the basic version of Flow. So, with that said, I think it's time to introduce Pete and to ask Pete to give us a demonstration. It's all yours, Pete.
Thanks, JD, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'll just share out my desktop here.
I can see it very well, Pete.
Wonderful, thank you. So before we get started, actually, what you see here is, from a UI perspective, a little bit different than what you've seen in even ENA from a general availability release. You're seeing an actual brand new theme called the dark theme, and this is available in patch 2 as one of the additional features that are included in that patch. I use it in my lab. It's, from my perspective, it's easier on my eyes, but it's a user by user preference. You can choose either a light or a dark theme, but I wanted to at least give you some exposure to what that looks like here. Let's look at a couple of use cases where both flow monitoring and NBAR or NBAR can be advantageous. We'll talk about some options on how to use these. We'll walk through the UI. we'll see, where can I use these effectively to solve specific problems? And I'll just give you some ideas on what some of those are that I've run into. So one of the things that you're seeing is I'm looking at the incident dashboard, and I'm focused on one of the devices that I've got access to. Now, this is actually a router that's sitting in New York. It's in one of my remote sites, and I'm seeing some port abnormalities going on. You'll also see that I've got some blacklisted applications. This is an NBAR specific thing. We'll talk about that in a bit as well. But I'm seeing some, high port utilization. Now, this is a lab environment. I'm not driving a whole lot of traffic, but I think I want to take a look at this a little bit more because what's going on that's driving, some of this usage. So from the incident dashboard, I can very quickly drill into that specific interface, and I can use the traditional methods, look at utilization, look at traffic, drill into charts to figure out, was this a spike or is this normal behavior? I can use ENA to do some trend analysis to see if this is going to cause a problem in 6 months or 12 months. But because I'm actually monitoring flows, I can take this a step further and understand what some of the applications are, and more importantly, who might be using and consuming the bandwidth on this WAN link. So in ENA, because I'm actually monitoring and collecting the flows for this device, and the method that you do that is very similar to what has been, what you've done with previous versions of Intuity. Export the flows. I'll talk about that in a minute as well. Export the flows, and you start collecting them on the Intuity server. But in my case, what I'm going to do is just select the flow dashboard. This is a standard dashboard that's available. It's going to default to, in my case, because I'm using IFA Premium, I'm going to, by default, look at conversations. So in the context of my LAN link here, which is my inside router interface from my WAN circuit to New York, actually, I'm actually looking at the conversations and the top conversations that are consuming bandwidth in that area. So this is helpful. I'm not actually seeing anything here that's showing me that I might have a problem, but I want to do a little bit more investigation into this. So let's take this a step further, and let's see if, do I have any sources that are possibly talking to a lot of destinations? Do I have a possible security issue going on? And it's very easy to look at that. And the way that I would do that is go into my configure chart option, and I would look at changing my breakdowns. Now, everything from here on up are part of the standard breakdowns. Obviously, with IFAP, I've got access to conversations. In addition to that, within IFAP, I can actually create my own custom breakdowns. And I've got one here called DDoS that I've set up. And before I actually show that, let's take a look at how I actually created that. So again, in the configuration menu, I'm going to manage my breakdowns, and I have the ability to create a brand new one here. I can name it, and I can set the aspects of that breakout the way that I want. But let's take a look at this DDoS one. What this one does specifically is look at all the conversations and all the flows that are traversing whatever the context is. It could be the port that you're looking at, which is the DMZ LAN port, or another port. And it's going to include a count. So to enable that, by default, the counts are turned off. So I would just turn this on, and I would actually set up a parameter, set one of the attributes in the flows to be counted. So in my case, I'm actually going to count all of the destinations that are specific to a given source. So I could actually pick applications. I could say, show me all the destinations that are part of an application. In my case, because I'm actually looking at more of a security profile, is this a DDoS attack from the inside, or is this somebody attacking from the outside? I can set these counters and actually see at the source level if a given device inside my network is talking to hundreds of other devices, and they probably shouldn't be. So the count's a good way to do this. Now, I could flip that around, and you could certainly change the count to say count all the sources coming from a given destination. So do I have any destinations that are specifically talking to a lot of devices in my network? And maybe that's showing me a problem as well. So these are ways to use flows to help you understand possible security impact and security issues. So in my case, I'm going to just cancel this because I can use this as I've already got it established. I'm going to change my breakdown and actually call this and see what it looks like. Now, I can sort on the counts column here, and if I've actually got a problem, I'd probably see some pretty large numbers in the hundreds or even in the thousands here. But I don't really see anything, so this is not likely a security issue that's going on in my network. But I want to take it a step further and drill in a little bit more. I'm going to go back and I want to look at the applications. So I'm seeing high utilization on this interface. What are the applications that are actually driving this? So I'm going to go to the top applications. Again, I'll look at 2 hours. I'm seeing what's current. And again, I'm seeing a profile of applications based on the flows where I'm not really seeing anything that stands out. But I'm going to take and narrow this a little bit further because I historically in this location, we've had high usage of web applications. So I'm going to take a look at HTTP traffic. And I can select this, and I'm going to add a filter to this. Now, in 16.5, these menus are very similar to what you've seen in 16.5. In addition, similar to 16.5, you've got the ability to filter on a selected item. I can do it over in this menu bar here, in this button, or I can select it as part of a dashlet menu. So I'm going to select it here, and I'm now focused on HTTP traffic. Now, I'm going to take this a step further because I'd like to understand, what are the hosts that are, using HTTP. To do that, just change my breakdown and take a look at top hosts. So I've now got a list of all the hosts that are driving, port 80 effectively. And again, I don't see anything that stands out here. I can sort the columns to see who's highest, but this is going to sort highest to lowest anyway. Now, in my New York location, I've got a number of VLANs, and I've got one VLAN that is more notorious for driving this type of traffic. So I'm going to actually add another filter. So on top of the application filter here, I'm just going to add another one, and that filter is going to be a host filter. And in this, what you can see is I've got the ability to select an IP address. So if I wanted to focus on a given host IP, I could do that. But in my case, I'm actually going to pick an IP range and focus on the VLAN that has been a problem in New York historically. So let's type that in, and I'll put in the range. I'll just do .60. So let's narrow this down. I'm now focused on a specific IP range looking at HTTP traffic. Now, this might show me something. This might actually highlight somebody who's sort of a top offender. It might indicate that I've just got, a lot of stuff going on in New York. It might indicate that I've got something that might be security related. The one thing that it's not going to tell me is within HTTP, within port 80, flows are not going to break down what type of HTTP application is it. And this is actually where NBAR comes into play and where it can be really helpful. Now, before I switch over to that, I want to take give you one more look at the flow configuration, because as JD mentioned, flows and monitoring flows is a little bit more heavy than just normal SNMP monitoring. The thing that you need to do is, this is an example of one of my servers. If I take a look at my flow configuration, it's a number of lines. It's not hard to do necessarily, but you have to know what you're doing in order to export flows from a device. So, and if you're doing this in scale, it's something that you want to pay attention to. It's something that you've likely had some experience with doing. But monitoring flows is a little bit heavier than, say, NBAR. NBAR, as an example in my configuration, is really straightforward because NBAR is a one-line enablement. So in my case, I'm just enabling the protocol discovery for NBAR in one line right here on this interface. So let's move over to NBAR a little bit. And even before I show you what it looks like on my system, let's take a look at some of the NBAR applications that come as part of that monitoring. Now, this is NBAR 2. Again, like JD mentioned, their NBAR 1 has got 90 to 100 applications that it supports out of the box. NBAR 2 has got a lot more, and especially if I'm looking at something like I want to monitor YouTube, NBAR 2 is going to include that. So this is something that will give me a better breakout of what those either HTTP or HTTPS applications might be. Let's take a look at my environment here. Now, I'm in a good position because in addition to flows on this interface, I'm actually enabling NBAR. So I can go directly from the flow dashboard down to an NBAR dashboard in context of that interface. Now, I can look at NBAR dashboards and flow dashboards at a view level. So if you've got views and role-based access set up, individual customers will have access to NBAR information specifically for the devices they have access to see. And in the context of a device, I've got the ability to see which interfaces are enabled for NBAR, and I see that large set of applications. So this is the list that JD mentioned, where even though you may not be collecting NBAR statistics on a given application, you can enable that here and have it enabled across that device, regardless of the interfaces. But I'm going to drill into this interface again and take a look at DMZ LAN interface. Now, one of the things that I can see is I've got some applications that are collecting data. So I've got these set up as the ones to pull for. And there's a number of them that I don't really care about. So I'm not pulling for information about all of these applications. And it's pretty easy for me to see if I've got good coverage. Do I have applications that are being picked up by NBAR, but I'm not actually collecting the statistics for those? So and I can see based on the in and out coverage that I've got pretty good coverage. I've got 100% for different time frames. But if I was running 50%, it might be something where I want to take a look and see what are the applications I'm not pulling for that I should. And there's a good way to do that. And actually, you can do this right from a console session on the device. So actually, I'll bring up my device here. I've timed out, so I'm going to have to log in again. And there's a command that I can run that will actually show me the statistics for NBAR that are active at this time. And that one is a show IP NBAR protocol discovery. So I'm focused on an interface, and I'm looking at the statistical bitrate information for the top 10 applications. I can change these values if need be, but this is going to tell me that I'm using, SNMP and Telnet are primarily being used. So I don't really have a whole lot else on this device that's being discovered. There are some protocols here that have been discovered. These might be ones that I want to pull for. Now I can run this as a command line utility, but one thing that's really interesting too is I could actually add this command as a Intuity configuration management task. If you've never used configuration management on ENA, this is something you should take a look at, because in addition to traditional configuration management tasks to change port descriptions, change devices, and do things like that, you can actually use config to dynamically run things like a show command and then look at that output. And as configuration management is role-based access, you can actually drive it from the UI, and you can have people in the NOC have access to showing the output of this command without having to have access directly into the device. So it's much more secure. It gives you the specific output that you want. Now, again, in looking at this, there's really not a lot of applications that I need to add into the mix. I've really got pretty good coverage on this port. If I want to enable polling, it's very easy. At the port level, I can certainly select it, go into Edit Application Settings, and change to either polling or polling and blacklisted modes. Now again, blacklisted, like what JD mentioned, will say, if I ever see a packet of this application type, send me an event. So send me an alert that says I've got a blacklisted application, tell me the port that it's riding on, tell me what the application is. So this will, if you've got corporate policies that said certain applications aren't really allowed, this is a way to monitor and actually identify if that application is being used. And you can make a decision what you do about that. So in my case, I'll just take our TSP and blacklist it and hit done, and I'm good to go. Now again, if I'm doing this at the device level, I've got access to more applications, because at the port level, these are only the applications that are part of that default NBAR set. Now one thing too, this is a patch 2 item I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of. In these radial dials, and whether or not I'm looking at a radial dial, that's application summary, or maybe the incident dashboard where you see critical, severe, major incidents, if you mouse over different slices, you'll see these highlight. If I want to look at what are all of the polling applications, all I have to do is select here, and it's going to break this out and tell me what they are. So again, a very good way within the UI to go from, I've got a question, one click, there's my answer. Now, if I extend this a little bit further and I want to take a look at inbound and outbound traffic, the default NBAR dashboard, again, is going to give me that. And if I mouse over my chart, I again have the breakout by applications that I'm polling for over time. So I can identify if I've got a spike, and I don't see anything here that's indicative of a problem, but it's a very quick way for me to spot an application that might be kind of an abnormal run for that specific application. And you're not going to see this, especially within the context of a web application in flows. But with ENA, you can deploy NBAR across a lot of your routers and your routed infrastructure, and you can augment that with flows where you need to. NBAR is very simple, and it's very easy to configure. I think with that, JD, I think I've covered what we wanted to go through today.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Pete. I think it's time now to take a look at the questions that have been submitted. Pat, do we have anything that we should be talking about?
Yes, we have a few that came in over the chat panel. And the first one is, what is the difference in the load that NBAR versus the NetFlow placed on the router generating the data?
Okay. The absolute level of load on the router itself is going to be dependent upon the version of code running on the router, the router model itself. Really, that I would refer to Cisco for their guidance. In general terms, because Flow is providing unique separate pieces of information about each and every conversation that is happening, broken down into the individual applications that are being used, then that's going to be more information going to be sent back from Flow than for NBAR, which is not identifying the end hosts of the conversation. So it is only identifying the counts of traffic flowing in each data direction for the individual applications. So there's potentially a lot more information that's going to be provided back by Flow than by NBAR. So from that standpoint, we would anticipate the amount of traffic coming back to be higher with Flow, and therefore I would expect the load on the router to be higher. That's about all I can say for that.
Okay, thanks, JD. Another question is, NetFlow is a push technology. The router generates it and sends it out. Is NBAR a push, or does the NBAR-enabled Intuity server have to poll the router for it?
It's the latter. With NBAR, we SNMP poll the information for each of the application types that you nominate to be polled on a per port basis. We poll on a regular cycle, and that's different to Flow, where Flow is sent from the router to the router's control rather than us pulling it.
Okay, thanks, JD. And then we have another question. Is this data generated on a layer 3 interface only, or can it be configured on a layer 2 interface, for example, a switch port?
I would anticipate it being available only on layer 3 interfaces. However, I do stand to be corrected on that one.
All right, and then we have a couple of questions left. How many devices can you support with NetFlow Premium?
We don't quote numbers of devices that can be supported. And by the way, the scalability on a single server is the same for the basic NetFlow and the premium flow monitoring. What we do quote is the number of flows per second that can be handled by a high specification server, which is around 50,000 flows per second. Remember, each flow represents an individual conversation using a specific application type. Now, that is controlled by what's actually happening on the network. What devices are talking to each other, what applications they are communicating with, and therefore what protocols are being used. So that is under the control of the network, not the Entuity servers. Therefore, it really depends upon the total number of flows being provided by all of the ports on all of the devices that are configured to send the flows in. If you had a lot of flows being reported by a single router, then that could dominate the overall scaling equation. However, if you had relatively few flows, unique flows, then you potentially would be able to take flows from many different routers within the environment. So it is totally based upon the number of flows rather than the number of devices.
Okay, thanks, JD. And then is 17.0 the lowest version of Entuity that includes NBAR polling and reporting, or is it in 16.5 or earlier? Do you have to buy NetFlow Premium to get it?
Okay, two questions there. First of all, NBAR support was added at 17.0 or ENA. It is not part of the 16.5 product. Secondly, it's part of the base product. You don't need to buy any additional licenses. It is unconnected as to whether it is being whether you have premium flow installed. So it's not related to premium flow, and it's introduced at 17.0 ENA.
There was one last question. What is the number of flows that IFA can handle? Is it flows per second?
Yeah, it flows per second, around 50,000 per server. However, if you are using the premium flow support, then if you are going to be exceeding 50,000 flows per second for a given server, you have the option to set up additional servers dedicated to flow collection, but you can offload that responsibility from the main Entuity polling servers. So a given polling server can have one or more additional flow collector servers that distribute that load. So Premium allows you to go beyond the 50,000 per server by adding more servers to do that job. So that's another reason to go for the Premium support.
Okay, thanks, JD. That's it.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much, Pat. Let's take a look just to wrap up here. We've got some helpful information available via the ENA Help Center. It's available via the support option on the Intuity website. You've also got a link in the main menu on the Intuity user interface itself to get to the ENA Help Center. Lots of video tutorials available, and we recommend you go to the Intuity YouTube Center because we've got further information, further webinars, including ones that we referred to as the ENA Friday videos, which were good primers on the topic of ENA. Pete did mention patch 2. That's the latest available patch for ENA, or 17.0. Here's an example of that black or the dark theme user interface. You can choose the light or the dark theme. That was one of the new features introduced at patch 2. We've got some wireless specific dashboards in there, and also for the BMC users, we've got the ability to integrate with Remedy single sign-on. So if you've got an integration there with TrueSight, then you will be able to have a single login that will satisfy both Intuity and TrueSight. We're going to be sending you a newsletter, and that'll come out from Pat shortly. It's going to list all of the tech talks that we've held recently with the links to get to the recordings of them. But we do request that if you've got ideas for future tech talks that you would like us to cover, please let us know. There's an email address for that. It's tech.talks@intuity.com. And with that, I will wish you all the best for the holiday season. We look forward to seeing you all in 2019.